About 5 after 9 in the morning, so let's get started. And Mr. CLA, I think we have some items that may be able to go on consent.
Yes, Madam Chair. Item number 1, if you like, you can place on consent. You've already heard the existing contract. This is an amendment to that contract for the SWIRP the HDR contract for SWIRP Phase 3. So if you'd like, you could consent that item.
That'll be fine. And that takes us to, there are 2 items on the agenda.
Yeah.
And the second one is extremely important, so I'd like to devote as much time as possible to that. And that would be, if you'd read that into the record.
Okay. Item number 2 is Department of Water and Power presentation on proposed comprehensive solar energy plan. We have a presentation from the department staff.
All right, great. Let's hear the presentation from the department.
Morning, Madam Chair. How are you?
How are you? Just for the record, if you could just say your name on the record.
Absolutely.
Just the 2 of you, huh?
Just the 2 of us today, ma'am.
All by your lonesome.
Yes. Morning, Madam Chair. My name is Joe Avila. I'm the staff assistant to the General Manager of the Department of Water and Power. And with me this morning is Aram Benjamin, Senior Assistant General Manager of the Power System, and the one ultimately in charge of implementing the proposed comprehensive solar plan. In response to your invitation, Madam Chair, we prepared a PowerPoint presentation, which should take about 10 minutes to go through. If you'd like, we can go through that, give you a little bit of a background as to what the solar plan entails for those who haven't had a chance to hear it.
Great.
Very good. Before I begin, I'd like to, on behalf of Mr. Nahai, thank the mayor and this council for their leadership in taking the Department of Water and Power from the darkness of a carbon-dominated past into the light of a green, more environmentally friendly future. The gravity of the dramatic changes taking place in Washington are not lost on us, so as the nation prepares to move forward in a more sustainable fashion, so too must the Department of Water and Power. In response to the directive to transform Los Angeles into the greenest big city in America, the Department, in cooperation with the mayor and council, put forth a comprehensive solar plan representing nearly 1,300 megawatts of carbon-free renewable solar power. Our general manager has stated time and again that he believes that the well-being of future generations of Americans hangs in the balance, such that we cannot afford to fail in this quest to change the way utilities, especially those in developed nations, produce electricity. Climate change, coupled with the Department of Water and Power's historic dependence on fossil fuel generation, if left unaddressed, will continue to weaken our local economy and threaten the city's future energy independence. What is the Solar Energy Plan? The Solar Energy Plan represents a mechanism by which we're going to achieve a 10% contribution toward our RPS goals by 2020. Solar LA, which is the new name for the Comprehensive Solar Plan, represents 1,280 megawatts of solar capacity installed, or about enough to provide 430,000 households with energy. It's about a third of our total customer base. The 3 main components of the solar plan include an expanded customer program. We've had a solar energy program in place for about a decade, and we have about 13 megawatts of installed capacity today. The second component is a large-scale program, which Mr. Benjamin has been working on for several years. This is mostly installations in out-of-basin, 50 to 250 megawatts. And the third component is the what's being called the Solar Initiative, which is going on the ballot in March. It's 400 megawatts of installed capacity that will be owned, operated, and maintained by the Department of Water and Power in basin. Why is the solar program so important to the city? The first one is the obvious assistance it'll provide in achieving the 20% by 2010 and 35% by 2020 goals. The latter of which, with all due respect to the governor, is the highest standard in the nation. Right now, the the state rather, is contemplating a 33% RPS goal, and we've had a voluntary 35% goal in place for quite a while. The second part is the fact that we have 76% of our generation coming from fossil fuels, and we need to change that carbon footprint, and solar is going to be one of the main components that are going to help us to achieve that goal.
Quick questions.
Yes, ma'am.
We can go through this piece by
Sure.
piece. Just give me in 3 quick sentences, again, the 3 components of the 1280 megawatt solar plan.
Okay. The first component is the customer program. We can actually flip up to that in the presentation if you'd like, Madam Chair. The first part is the rebate program. As I said, this is a program that's been in place for about a decade. We're planning on looking to expand this program. It'll provide about 130 megawatts by 2016.
And the next part?
The SunShares program, the goal is to provide 100 megawatts by 2020.
And the third?
And the third is the feed-in tariff, which is 150 megawatts. In total, the customer programs would generate 380 megawatts.
So how does each of those work in tandem to improve the department's overall renewable portfolio standard?
Well, in combination, they're going to achieve a 10% contribution toward that, toward each of the goals. They're probably going to contribute less toward the 2010 because it's a year away, or just a little over a year away, but they're expected to provide 10% of our overall goal by the 2020 target of the 35%. So they're going to provide 10% of that 35, ma'am.
Okay, now tell me how each objective was determined for each program.
Okay.
For example, why was 130 megawatts for the customer-owned solar power system and 150 megawatts for the feed-in tariff program, and how were these numbers derived?
Okay. The rebate and the feed-in tariff program of 130 plus 150 represents our SB1 goal. We have a state-mandated program, the Million Rooftop program that the governor put in place, and our obligation in relation to that program is 280 megawatts. So we split them between these two programs. The 100 for the SunShares program, in combination with the other two programs, brings the total to 380. These are all expected to be in-basin programs. And when you add these plus the 400 in-basin of the initiative, it adds up to almost 800 megawatts.
I understand what you mean in-basin programs, but where does
Okay.
the expectation come that they are in-basin programs? Is that just the underlying assumption that the department makes that they will be in-basin, and that's what the basin needs?
What we were trying to do is exploit the maximum amount of solar generation within the city. We've got about an estimates
In
of
the
anywhere
basin,
within the basin, yes, ma'am, of between 700 and 900 megawatts. So this comes out at 780, and it's right about in the middle. What we were trying to do is exploit.
Basically what the basin can bear?
Based on our analysis, yes, ma'am. We expect that the maximum amount of solar generation capacity within the city, within the basin, is about 700 to 900 megawatts, and this comes out at just about 800 megawatts. So that's how they were derived.
All right. Okay.
These are some other solar programs that we've been investigating. There's a solar water heating program, and it's one of many of the energy efficiency programs that we're going to be exploring, but it's one of the ones that Mr. Nahai has a particular interest in. He visited Israel, and apparently they're fairly ubiquitous there in Israel, and it's one of the programs that the Southern California Gas Company is actually helping to support with energy incentives. So we're going to be looking at a number of energy efficiency programs. The second one is financing. We're talking to a number of lenders. In fact, we're going to a conference here shortly to look at ways in which we could provide financing both to our low-income customers as well as our commercial customers to help them finance solar. The cost has always been a big inhibitor for us to be able to implement large quantities of solar. So we're going to be looking to provide different kinds of financing mechanisms that will help facilitate more installations of solar. And the third is net metering, and this is just a description of how we go about providing a benefit or a credit back to customers who have solar installations on their rooftops.
Okay, I got a couple of quick questions. So before we go out of
Sure.
out of basin issues, talk to me about the impact on the ratepayer for each solar plan component, the three that you've listed. Customer solar, DWP owned in basin solar, and large-scale solar.
Okay. We're actually going to get to that in the presentation. If you'd like, I can take things out of sequence.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay.
You can take it out of
All right. On the with regard to the customer programs, cost, as I said, has always been a challenge for us. It's probably the most expensive, and Mr. Benjamin can talk more on that. But it's always been the most expensive resource that we've had in our portfolio, whether it was green or brown power. So we've been talking to the solar installers and explaining to them that the intent of the program is to do things on a larger scale. I think if you look at our solar installations, they've been, for the most part, on rooftops. We've got about 1,200 installations, and while the bulk of the work has been in the customer installations, most of our power comes from our commercial installations, which are larger. So when we looked at the program, we tried to figure out why is it so expensive and why is it such a challenge for us to get any kind of traction with regard to a program that's been in place for 10 years and we've got 13 megawatts to show for it. What we realized is that just the economies of scale just weren't there. Every single installation was basically a custom-made concept car installation that had to be built for that household. And so when talking to the solar industry, we told them, or we explained to them, if we did something where we made a sustained commitment to your industry, and we did something on a much larger scale, and we worked with you, and said, instead of doing, what we're doing right now, where you're selling solar basically, door to door, like aluminum siding, is there a way in which we could say, we'll work in a partnership and try to install these on a larger scale? What would that do to the cost? And they said, that would substantially reduce the cost. We said, great. Now, if we made a commitment to you to buy just from you as a manufacturer of solar panels, because we don't install them, what would that do to the cost? And they said, then we could do a lot of things. We could give you a volume discount. Oh, great. Okay, so that's another element. Now, is there a possibility you could move your manufacturing here to California if we made a large enough commitment? And they said, yes. That's something we could certainly consider. So what we try to do is kind of rejigger the plant, the whole solar approach, so that we could try to lower cost, look at different types of financing mechanisms, take advantage of tax credits, and we're talking to financial institutions right now to afford us, who have a tax appetite and can help us to realize those tax benefits that were recently extended. We're looking at volume discounts. We're looking at building projects that are on a larger scale, where you can get the economies of scale on the installations, and we're looking to build them in basin, so we save on the transmission costs.
Let me ask you a question, because there have been some estimations that a solar program could increase rates up to, for example, as high as 8%, if not more. Tell me the department's assessment of that possibility.
Our preliminary estimates that we provided as part of the solar initiative, as you may recall, Madam Chair, had anywhere from a 2 to 8% increase. The purpose of the next 90 days from the time that the initiative was actually approved by this council is being spent doing that analysis right now. We asked for 90 days. And we're in the midst of doing exactly that. There's a very detailed amount of modeling. First the program had to be identified. In order to figure out what it's going to cost, we had to kind of figure out how big is the breadbox. So what we're doing, what we had to do first and foremost was to get the plan approved, at least the basic parameters of how many megawatts we were installing, where we're going to be installing them. And yesterday actually was the first day where the team, where we have a cross-functional team, including power, finance, and our and other groups within the department, customer service. So we're going to be sitting down and figuring out what the cost implications are going to be. So the modeling is going to be very important for determining what the rate and cost and
All right, let
impact
me ask
is going
you
to be.
clarification on this. 6 months ago, the council granted the Department of Water and Power authority to increase power rates in order to address aging infrastructure and the staffing needs related to that.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, my question is, we set aside money for that
Yes.
express purpose, to be used explicitly for that purpose. Now we have this program. Now, are there power revenue funds, additional funds, somewhere in the department's budget that are intended to be used to support solar programs?
Well, the rate increase, as you may recall, was primarily to do infrastructure. That had to do with T&D, the transmission and distribution system, the aging infrastructure to actually transport the power. We've always...
I would say, just so for the record,
Sure.
we voted exclusively to devote that money to that.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes. So We've had an RPS program in place for a number of years. We set aside money as part of our power revenues as a routine matter to fund all of our renewables, which include solar, geothermal, wind, and hydroelectric power. So there was always a strata there that was dedicated to solar, and it was part of that. Now, we didn't contemplate doing solar on this large a scale, so we're in the process right now of evaluating what, if any, impacts there'll be on our rates by introduction of this new program. So
Well,
there's been a solar component.
I'd also like an evaluation, if you can't answer it today,
Yes, ma'am.
if there is an intention to take away the money, some of the money that we voted on to fix and repair and rehabilitate the infrastructure, we need to know that.
I can clarify, Madam Chair. I mean, the PRP program that the council voted on was dedicated for the specific targets for infrastructure repairs, and that money is set aside to implement those programs. Are going forward right now. We have $313 million this year on the capital improvement project. That's well on its way to be implemented. What I would say is, as part of the financial evaluation that we have to go through, is to look at the renewable portfolio money that we have budgeted on previous years and reprioritize those funding to make sure we minimize the impact on the rates as we look at the financial model.
Let me I just want to hear it clearly on the record. The money that we voted on to repair
Yes.
the infrastructure, are you telling me that you may look at some of that money for the new solar program?
No,
You're not going to look at any of that money?
That money is set aside for infrastructure improvement. That money is well on its way to be implemented as part of the infrastructure repair. What I was saying is the money that we have allocated for other renewables, for example, concentrated solar, we had plans for implementing like 500 megawatts of concentrated solar in the desert.
Out of the same pot of money?
No, that's a separate renewable portfolio. Standard money is a separate funding.
As far as the infrastructure money,
That's-
that is untouched,
Right,
100% untouched.
right.
Yes.
For the record, Mr. Cardenas has joined us. All right. Please proceed.
Yes, so so large-scale programs that Mr. Benjamin just mentioned, for 500 megawatts, these are out of basin, concentrating solar trough, and some of our more efficient of our solar installations. And they come in roughly half the cost of some of our in-basin PV installations. So this is really the mule that'll be pulling the train as far as our solar plan is concerned. We're right now, at last count, I think we're in negotiations right now for about 620 megawatts. Some projects that are ranging from 50 to 250 megawatts. So this is a program that's already underway, and it'll comprise about 500 megawatts of our 1280. The last component is the LEDWP owned program. This is the solar initiative that, if approved in March, will provide 400 megawatts of in-basin solar that'll be owned, operated, and maintained by the Department of Water and Power. It'll be installed on water and power property. We're looking at transmission corridors on buildings owned by the Department of Water and Power. We're looking at airports outside the city of Los Angeles, places like Palmdale that's been identified as a location where there's at least 100 megawatts worth of capacity. So we're going to be trying to pick off the low-hanging fruit that within the department's own portfolio of real estate holdings and trying to install these within the basin.
Excuse me, could we get copies of this when I will read it?
Okay, can you just please talk to the clerk over there, sir, and let her help you? Go ahead.
Very good. Some of the key benefits of the solar energy program. Probably one of the biggest drivers for us in trying to get the
Take mine.
No, we got it.
is the regulatory climate that we're starting to see, not only in California, but certainly at the national level as well. But different types of legislation like AB 32, SB 1, the solar initiative that the governor put forward, and others are asking for utilities in particular to cut back on their carbon-generated electricity. The Department of Water and Power, historically has had a big emphasis on carbon-based types of generation, both coal and gas. The solar program will help us tremendously on the gas side, especially, and there's also an environmental justice element to it, insofar as in the summertime, like clockwork, we have to fire up our gas-fired generation that's all concentrated in the valley, and to the extent that we have 1,280 megawatts of solar, we're going to be able to cut back on some of that gas-fired generation in the valley, as an example. Another thing is the fact that coal, although it's our cheapest resource today, at something like 2 cents a kilowatt hour, coal's not going to last forever. And we saw some giant fluctuations on the gas market from $6 an MMBtu up to 13, and that's not recoverable directly, or wasn't until we froze the ECAP. But it has historically not been recoverable through our rates. And so as a result of that, we're looking to solar to help stabilize our rates. Once it's installed and once we paid off the capital cost on this solar, it's going to provide a nice, sustainable, and green resource that will not be subject to the fluctuations and volatility in some of the fossil fuel markets.
Okay. A couple of questions, and then I want to,
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sure Mr. Cardenas has some questions.
Sure.
I wanted to go back to this question of protecting funds. What mechanism does the department have in place to ensure that the funding for infrastructure upgrades is not commingled or used for this new solar plan?
Madam Chair, the way we organize our budget is it's divided into functional items that we have established for the infrastructure reliability program. Those have been identified as part of our program. Each functional item has specific projects identified in our budgeting system that has specific scope, schedule, and costs associated with that we review on a weekly basis. So those fundings, the scope of that funding is very clear. The schedule of our implementation is very clear, and we could identify, to the last dollar of where that funding is being allocated to, and separate that from our regular budgeting process.
Okay, now, as far as this new proposal, how much of the cost can the ECAF absorb? What's the impact on the ECAF? And do you anticipate a need for an ECAF adjustment?
Well, part of the purpose of the next 90 days is to do exactly that, to figure out, first and foremost, how much of this is already spoken for. As an example, our SB1 monies, we already have a solar program, a solar rebate program that was funded previously that had about $150 million set aside for that. The SB1 program called for $313 million in investment, so roughly half of that new customer program is already funded today. The 400 megawatt in-basin program, unless it's approved, will not have any impact unless it's approved. And we've already said it's anywhere from 2 to 8%, depending on some of the economies of scale and tax subsidies and whatnot. So we've somewhat quantified the impact of that. But really, at the end of the day, as far as whether there will be base rate or ECAF impacts, that is really the purpose of the next 90 days to do that analysis, Madam Chair.
I've got a lot of questions, and Mr. Cardenas has some questions too.
Okay.
So I want to take a break, and then we'll switch back and forth, and we have some cards here. I'm guessing that we're going to have to give you these questions for you to answer and to come back to us, and I will read them into the record so you know.
Yes, ma'am. That'll be fine.
Mr. Cardenas, you want to take a few questions?
Sure. I have a bunch of questions, but I'll narrow it down to a few. When I'm looking at the page 14, typical energy resources, in yellow, the heading, it says, at the top in red it says solar's price in cents per kilowatt hour compared to other technologies. When you have solar photovoltaic and you have economic life, it says 30 years. It's my understanding that the photovoltaic technology, at least of yesterday, maybe this is a new technology, or that they don't tend to last 30 years. They tend to have a drop-off, pretty dramatic, after about 15 years, serious drop-off.
We're seeing 30-year lives, and you're exactly right, Council Member. What they do is they have to have their inverters changed out, usually in years 10 to 15. You're exactly right. There is a dramatic drop-off, and that's the time at which they need to have their inverters changed.
Okay.
And it extends the life of the asset. Because the rest of it's kind of an inert, as you know, you're an engineer,
Yeah.
council member, so it's for the most part, a fairly inert piece of equipment. It's the inverter that's the operative piece that has to be changed out, and you're exactly right in about year 15.
Okay, now, if you look at that, what is the expenditure ratio on those components that have to be changed out?
We factored that in, and I believe it's about 2 cents a kilowatt hour is the O&M, and it includes the changed out of the inverter as well as maintenance, washing off the panels and that sort of thing. But unless they have a yaw mechanism or tracking mechanism, there aren't any moving parts for the most part. So,
But whether we like it or not, unfortunately, we have some examples in the basin within DWP. Aren't there some photovoltaic in the parking lots and things of that nature at the convention center?
yes, sir.
Do we have any tracking on the efficiency rates of those?
Yes, sir.
And-
I think we did a study on that when you were there on the Commerce Committee, sir. And
Now, I'm sure whatever those numbers come out to, the current industry will either dispute it or tell us that was yesterday's models, today's are much more efficient, et cetera. Those numbers really don't count. But that's what we have to go on. And I'm not saying that is today's model, but we should be honest with ourselves, because photovoltaic has been, at least when I got to the council, when I was in the legislature, they were talking about photovoltaic was 60, 70 cents a kilowatt hour and things of that nature. Now we're getting down here, it's a tremendous range of 17 to 30 cents. But when you look at the scale here on this page, it definitely is the most expensive on average. Sergeant, is somebody talking back there?
Hold on. Can you ask him to take it out in the hallway so we don't have to listen to his conversation? All right, we can
Thank
hear
you.
every word you're saying.
Exactly.
Yeah. Is that 7878? Let me call you right back.
Sorry about that, Chairman.
It's just rude.
It is very rude.
That's what the hallway's for.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of room out there.
Thank you.
So it still is the most expensive component. Yet at the same time, I think unfortunately to most Americans, it's the most visible. I'm not saying it's the most understood. It's probably the most misunderstood, but it's the most visible. People see this little panel and they see the little etchings on it and they say, cool, free energy, piece of cake. Is it a piece of cake, or is it expensive? Is it something that is more complicated than just sticking a panel out there and voila, my refrigerator and my washer and dryer are all cool now. I don't need any other energy.
It's let me answer the technology issue, council member. As you know, there's different variation of the panels, the thin film technology. We've looked at the developments and how they, manufacture those things. We've visited the sites, where they're addressing the degradation issues, and we are experimenting with those. We're not counting those as part of this 30-year life. You're absolutely right. On the PV, though, we have pretty good historic records, as far as their durability and their sustained, power production. So we're considering those type of technologies here, and we're excluding all those experimental ones that we're going to do. But our hope is that the industry, as it's developing, they will make these panels much more efficiently and much more, economically feasible. So we can rely on this source of power.
So for all intent and purpose, this line item here is the worst case scenario for PV. I mean, not
PV.
the worst, but
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? We're not fudging factors or what
No.
have you, making it look good. We're trying to be as honest as possible
Yes.
in today's practicality based on what's proven technology, et cetera, and the minor improvements that have gone on those technologies.
Yep.
These are the numbers.
Yeah, the manufacturing process has improved tremendously. The last 5 years have made great improvements. We don't have the historic data for that period of time, but I think based on our interpretation of what the technology has done, we are pretty confident that with proper maintenance, with proper care of the systems, those things will last, good 20 to 30 years.
Does your report here speak at all to the status on the 20% by 2010 goal? And
It
where
doesn't,
we're
but
at?
we achieved 10% on October 1st. And we're on track, I think, right now, if you look at all of our portfolio of facilities that are already operating, plus the ones that are in negotiation, we're at about, what, 25% now?
25%.
So-
We have crossed the 10%.
No, slow down. Slow down.
Yes, sir.
I need to ask you specific questions.
Okay.
When you say we've achieved 10%,
Yes.
that means on any average day or any average month today, if you took a snapshot
Yeah.
of where we're getting our power from, we're now at 8% on active power.
10.
Excuse me, thank you. 10% on active power
Yes, sir.
as of October 2008.
It's a little cloudy today, but yes, sir.
Yep.
On that
but
day.
that's what I'm saying, not on any given day, but on any given average month or what
Yes.
have you. Okay.
Yes.
So we
That's-
are relying on,
Producing.
we're producing and relying on and using as much as 10% of our power consumption is coming from our renewable portfolio standard product.
That's correct.
Products.
Let me,
Okay.
Can I just clarify that so there's no misunderstanding on the definitions of energy delivered, because our definition is different from other definitions of renewables. We take credit for energy actually delivered to the customer. And our true up is at the end of the month, we true up the meter reading and what we delivered based on green energy. So as of October last month, we had crossed the 10%. We're actually 12.1% of our actual delivered energy to City of LA was 12.1% in the month of October. But as you know, with the fires and issues that we have bringing, you might have a dip. We might dip into 5% one day and then go to 18% the other day, and
Exactly.
so on. But the definition, the CEC definition of renewable energy delivered is closed. The period closes on December 31 at the end of the year, and it's a cumulative energy delivered throughout the year, the 12-month period.
Okay. So basically, it's not that complicated a formula at the end of the year, and you're
Right.
talking about over a 12-month basis,
12-month
right?
basis.
So basically, you take the energy produced/consumed,
Right.
because there's a slight difference in that as well, and then you take the amount of energy produced/consumed from our renewable portfolio standard products,
Right.
right? And then you just divide that, and you
Right.
get a straight percentage,
Percentage,
right?
sure.
Okay, not that complicated. So now we're definitely across the 10% line. We feel confident about that. So when we evaluate on December 31st, the department feels confident that we're going to be beyond the 10%.
Well, that's why I wanted to clarify, because it takes 12 months for that cumulative average to kind of come up. So we might have crossed the line in October, November, December, but it'll
Oh.
take 12 months for us to actually report on the label content.
So if everything goes as expected, then if we had a 12-month
Right.
rolling average from October through October of
Right.
next year, that's where we
That's
feel
what-
confident that we'll be across the 10%, possibly even as high as 12 or more.
Yeah, we need to hover above 12, 13, 14% on average. So if we have a dip, we account for it. But at the end of the 12-month period, we will report on the content label that we have crossed the 10% cumulative average.
Okay. Now, how are we doing with getting to our 20%?
We have tabulated on our renewable standards the projects that we're going after. We have about 25.4% or so target right now that we're going after. That's a mix of solar, geothermal, biofuels, and all
EV,
those,
everything on the list here.
Everything on the list that you see, we have 25.4%, recognizing that some of these projects are not going to come through. We have, with the financial meltdown and things,
There's
people-
siting issues.
Siting issues.
For example, we had a biomass one that was inked with a company
Right.
about 4 years ago, 4 years ago, and I warned them, God bless you, good luck, but siting in the LA basin is probably going to be tough, and it sounds like they weren't able to get the site.
So being realistic about what can come through and what we're going after, we just closed an RFP period to invite more renewable projects into our portfolio, and we have to go through the screening process. But we're shooting for somewhere around 26, 27%, hoping that when we're all done at the end of the 2010, we come up with 20%.
Now, I have a question for you. It's my understanding that the state of California recognized if you're going to put it in your portfolio as renewable energy in California, they allow up to 25% generation of gas to complement the site, right? The production,
For
up to
balancing.
25%, right, of natural gas.
Yeah, for solar thermal types of facilities, that's correct.
Only for those, or for?
I-
It's my understanding, as long as it's a
Biofuel-
plant and they're,
Biofuels, yeah, biofuels.
you're allowed to complement that for reliability purposes.
Yes.
And so that's allowed, and we can still call the energy coming out of there renewable energy.
Correct.
Correct?
5%.
So it's still constant. They haven't changed that.
Yes, sir.
Any warnings or anything about somebody messing with that?
I'm not
Haven't
aware.
heard anything, no.
Yeah.
No.
We can check on,
Yeah.
I will follow up on that and get back to you.
Yeah, the legislature just convened yesterday, and I think the governor asked them all to stay. And
Let me
I
clarify
remember-
before I answer that to make sure.
in any given year, there's several thousand wonderful, tremendous ideas that the legislature puts into motion as potential laws. And unfortunately, this could be one of them.
I will clarify that, council member.
Thank you. I have a bunch of questions, but not for
Yeah,
today.
I
I'm done.
think what we ought to do, and Mr. Garcetti is here and put some questions on the record, and I have a lot more questions. And I'm going to let the folks who filled out speaker cards speak, and then we're going to put our questions on the record because we're going to have you come back because we're not going to be able to finish this in one day.
Do you mind if I say? Do you mind if I say one more thing, Madam Chairman?
It's the Tony Cardenas tradition of coming back from vacation with a goatee.
It looks good.
Thanks,
Looks
man.
good. He threw me off.
My
threw
luggage
me off
hasn't
there.
arrived either.
He got me by surprise. Chairman, I just want to say one thing. I've been on and off this committee for over 5 years now, and I would like to say that I do appreciate the fact that the department is getting more detailed in the reports, willing to go back and answer more detailed questions than they have in the past. And I do appreciate the fact that the council and the department have been much more responsible, both we and they, on making sure that we're not dealing with issues on, we got to get this done now, we got to get this done now. I just want to say that that's tremendous progress, and I think it has created a lot more responsibility coming from the department, and with all due respect, the policymaking body of the City Council has done a much better job of making sure that we do things much more responsibly and we don't hurry things through, and that we get questions answered. And I want to thank the staff at the department for being better prepared, and it's been an ongoing improvement, and I noticed the difference. Thank you.
Mr. Garcetti.
No, I mostly just want to hear from the public today. I appreciate this, and I'm going to chew through this, as part of the mayor's press conference when we discussed this. And I want to thank Mr. Cardenas and Mr. Padilla, who both really, with me, were early solar adopters, and our chairwoman, who's always been very green on these issues. I appreciate also the financial estimates here, because it's easy to kind of wildly get out of whack when people start saying, oh, this is costing a lot more. And what's critical with that, too, is the comparisons to, the other technologies. One of those things that's not in here, too, that I'm going to just keep saying every single time I'm here is current monthly bill of $69.50. When you see the expectant case of going up to $71 or $72 per customer, I think that we should be also projecting out what we expect coal to be costing us, because with AB 32 and others, coal will not stay the price that it is. So people comparing to today, carbon tax and carbon, the cost of high polluting carbon-based forms of energy, if we're looking at a true projection 5 years out from now, whether it's from the work that Congress and the new administration is talking about, or whether it's AB 32 here in the state, I want to make sure we're comparing apples with apples and not apples with oranges. I do believe that our alternative forms of energy, because of these policy changes, will be equal, in some cases even less, depending on what the carbon tax that we're looking at is. And I think that everybody who's making policy in this area is very clearly on that path, and in some cases, like California, has already adopted that as policy. So that's critical in reading analysis. That always frustrates me when people are like, well, coal in 2008 cost blank. Let's compare that to what solar in 2008 cost. We see the cost of solar going down. We see also the cost of carbon-based coal and other forms of energy going up. So that's critical.
Councilmember Garcetti, do you mind if I interject?
Sure, go
So
ahead.
they can help clarify why that's an important point. Are we still bouncing around 50%-ish is our coal?
It's about 47% right now of coal.
Okay, so give or take, we're still in the 50% range,
50 and 25 gas.
and 25 gas.
yes,
See,
right around there.
so
That's
that
a
it's
huge
very, very,
impact.
exactly, that's very, very
the
relevant.
ratepayers. So as responsibly, and I really appreciate the work that neighborhood councils and public and environmental groups and business has put into this, but we should be factoring that piece into when we're saying what should those options be. And I was public, this is a much better process. I've spent a lot of time and will continue to make sure that neighborhood councils are involved in chewing over this part of the remaining 2/3 of the solar program that the mayor is proposing, because I think it's critical to get that public feed in. But I also want, no pun intended, but I do want to make sure that there is apples and apples comparison there. So if we could maybe chart that out, some projections of what we think AB 32 or some of the proposed cap and trade programs are going to be pricing carbon at, that would be, I think, very instructive for the public as well. Secondly, the piece that is, for me, not teased out enough, and it's part of the reason I got, besides the environmental and health effects, into the solar strategy years ago, is looking at what we can do to really cluster green businesses here, and the tax breaks that we can give. I'd like us to be working, and maybe the CLA can help us on this, in what we can do with the city's gross receipts tax. We had a lot of solar companies that initially came here to LA when we had our residential program. Then they kind of packed up and left because we had problems with how we did our installation, the bureaucracy has been too much, et cetera. The way solar companies are now working is a lot of them are based in places like Arizona, but in fact those components are coming from elsewhere. Those are just kind of assembly plants that are not necessarily a lot of jobs there. But I do think that there are jobs that we can locate here in Los Angeles, especially if we're looking at something like 1.3 megawatts. Having that sort of predictability for the solar industry is key to where they settle, but it will require us not just doing city incentives, but putting a legislative package together at the state and federal level that will make LA a very attractive place to do that business. So that's another piece I'd like to continue to talk about.
Okay. Why don't we have the three folks speak 2 minutes each, and then we'll put some final questions on the record, and my colleagues can do the same, and then we'll close it off at 10. Jack Humperville, Soledad Garcia, and Daniel Weissman. Why don't you come over here, come up, third chair at that table?
Madam Chair, just a bit of housekeeping. Would you like to go, now you have a full quorum, would you like to go back to item number 1, which was your recommendation was a consent item?
Yes.
Okay. So the HER contract.
Mr.
the action
Humphreysville,
was
if you'll
consent?
excuse me during this, I have to do my Rules Committee meeting where I sign the ballot signatories. You were the first from the neighborhood councils who did come, so I am recommending you as the against on this solar piece, but you'll excuse me for not being here to be able to listen because I got to run that meeting downstairs, but
Right.
my deputy's here.
So I
Thank
won
you.
the prize.
I think you did. That we try to be as dispassionate about it. You were the first to get to us, and there were no organizations under our charter, Trump individuals, electeds under Trump organizations, but no organizations or electeds.
Who can I talk to get the parameters of what we can say and not say in the time?
City clerk. We'll make sure the city clerk is in direct communication with you about that
Thank
and
you.
give you 100% of the instructions.
Thank
okay.
you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
A couple of comments. One, with regards to rates. First of all, Ms. Perry, you mentioned or questioned whether the rate at $225 million annualized rate increases was going exclusively to the infrastructure. I question whether it is. And in particular, I would say, how do you think they paid for the 6%, $60 million pay increase for the DWP workers? Where did that money come from? It certainly didn't come from the ECAF. I don't know where it came from. It had to come from the rate increases. Secondly, with regards to the solar initiative, I would suggest that the City Council made a very uninformed decision. First of all, if you go and look at what the Southern California Edison filed with the Public Utilities Commission and also with the DRA, you will find that there is a detailed study, both operational, engineering, financial, and all sorts of other goodies there, that they filed with the PUC. That is now being used by the DRA. The only information that the City Council had was a back-of-the-envelope financial presentation by Mr. Nahai, of which a number of the assumptions, I would say, are pie in the sky, whether you're going to be able to get tax credits, accelerated depreciation, the technology, the ability to put businesses here in California given the tax rates. I just think there's too much speculation there for you all to have made an informed decision. Secondly, another part of the analysis that I would say is what is the incremental cost of having DWP do the labor? associated with this. My gut feel is that it's going to end up costing the ratepayers of Los Angeles several hundreds of millions of dollars because of the incremental costs associated with the high wage rates and work rules associated with the IBEW. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Garcia?
Thank you. You've heard from Jack. Mine is going to be much simpler. I am very pleased that we're going to have the comprehensive solar system because I know it's needed. We all know that it's needed. I would ask that in terms of employment, that the outreach be extended throughout the city of Los Angeles and where it is outsourcing, that it be within the city of Los Angeles as much as possible. The unemployment rate here is as high as it is anyplace else, and I think since we're funding it, it should remain here. I would recommend that that there be a coordination in the training process of the workers. We have vocational education, we have community colleges, and we have union training sessions in addition to what DWP has, but I would hope that it would be more outsourcing, anywhere from 50 to 100% if it were possible. I know that it's not, but the pie in the sky is what I would like to see done. Other than what you've already heard, I would thank you very much for what you are doing. I think it's a good step forward, and I think we can reach every bit as much as Edison is doing, if not outsource them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Weissman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope that document and its associated pages can be provided for us, too. I have several points I want to make. Number one, we're dealing in a set of new technologies in solar. There's going to be newer technologies come along. There is a lot of large articles in the newspaper over the last few days about the mayor's solar plan, but a small little article in the Daily News says that UCLA is now developing a silicon chip made with a new plastic, which is much less expensive and far more efficient. That new technology is something we have to, I think, build into these programs. I want to do a little mathematics with you. These programs are in the billions of dollars. They're going to require large bond issues, and I want to do a little math on that. $1.5 billion, if distributed to 1.4 million customers, is $1,000 per customer. Now, I'm only speaking of the residential customers now. But the order of magnitude still holds. $1,000 at $2 a month is 40 years worth. We're talking about a huge increase. I wish I had a company where I could pass my increased costs through to my customers as easily as the Department of Water and Power can in their ECAP. Another concept that I became aware of when I visited the Bay Area last week was solar leasing, and I brought that idea to the DWP, and I think we need to bring that idea here to Los Angeles. Solar leasing is a system by which somebody who can't afford the 20, 30, 40, some people say as much as $70 million per house to put an installation in, can have an installation on their house or on their property. The amount of power that goes to that property is deducted from that, and there's a lease arrangement so that solar power can be distributed far more widely. Thank you very much for hearing me.
Mr. Melrose Castillo?
Good morning, committee members. I'll admit that I don't know much about the comprehensive solar energy plan, but I'll just sum up briefly what I do know. I'm a member of the Neighborhood Council in El Sereno, and I'm also a student at the East LA Skills Center. I've been studying PV theory for the last year. And like I said, I don't know much about the plan, but my understanding is that LA wants to become the greenest city in America, and I'm looking forward to saying that I live in the greenest city in America. I'm also looking forward to joining the workforce that will help me install solar panels, and I'm also looking forward to seeing the students in my class who've been working very hard and studying very hard. I'm also looking forward to hear them say that they've gotten some high-paying jobs. My understanding from the plan is that only those who are in a select club will be able to participate in the city's activities or the city's plans to go green. And though I've only got a minute left, I just wanted to let you guys know that if your plan is to not include students, small businesses, in the private sector, then I think that's wrong. I think that with talks about a recession and things like that, I think that we really need to consider including more people, especially with a great plan such as this, to provide more solar panels and to green the city of LA is a fantastic idea. I'm all for it. But at the same time, I think we should also consider involving others like myself who are working hard to make a career change and who are working hard to participate and to go along with the city's plans. That was my only comment. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cardenas wanted to, why don't you take this time to put your questions on the record, because we're going to have them come back, and then I'll finish up.
This question to the department is, one of the responsibilities of the department is to figure out the balance of how much power they're putting on our system based on how much consumption is going on. But there's something that I think that could become a dilemma if we were to start to amass a kind of system where people are producing their own energy, and when there's excess energy, it comes back onto our system, and then we commit to absorbing that. With all of these small individuals doing that, I find it hard to believe that we could politically introduce into those contracts that they have a responsibility to notify us or to somehow cooperate with us and not just turn their system off because they happen to be leaving for 2 weeks or what have you. When we're starting to feel the ebb and flow, and all of a sudden we're start to decide how much power we're going to produce, how much power is coming back to us on these little tiny systems all over the city, whether it's households or businesses or what have you, because that's what people are talking about, having a two-way system where they produce energy. If they don't use it, it comes onto our grid. Wonderful, we get to use it. We buy it off them or we give them offsets or what have you. When you do that in minutia and small amounts, it doesn't have an effect on the overall dynamics of the management of the Department of Water and Power. And one of the things that people don't understand about power, unlike water, if you allow water to flow and then you decide to back off, all you have to do is slow down that flow or cut off that flow. But the water that you cut off remains there, for example, in the reservoir or in the system until another day, another month, or another year. But when it comes to power, once power is produced, it goes onto the system. If it doesn't find a place to be used, doesn't it just dissipate and it's energy lost, right? You don't get to store it like you do water. So that's one of the dynamics I've never heard the department talk about, but I've heard radio stations and all kinds of individuals just excited about the idea that we can have systems now where people can produce their own energy, and if there's excess energy, the department should or will absorb it. But at the same time, isn't there a management aspect to the department?
Yes.
It's actually somewhat of a science on how to balance that, right?
Yes, we have a very detailed plan, Council Member. If you would like, we will go into the details. But just short answer is you're absolutely right. This is one of the most critical reliability-related issues that we had to deal with for us to absorb this energy in a safe and reliable way, so we don't put our system at jeopardy. If you would like, we will present to you the integration. We call it the power integration plan.
Yeah, I'd love to have this committee get that presentation.
Definitely.
And my final point on that is to the ratepayers. If we get into these agreements in the hundreds and then eventually in the thousands and tens of thousands of agreements across the city, and then all of a sudden we have a power day where all of a sudden everybody gave the department power and the department said, we just got to let it dissipate. Guess what? If we give them credits of 4.7 cents or whatever it is per kilowatt of power, and then we allow a bunch of megawatts to just dissipate out there, guess what? The ratepayer paid that. They paid for something that got wasted. The department didn't pay for it because the department then has to look at the ratepayers and say, the offset is to the ratepayers. We just spent money on power that didn't get used in a very large amount, and if it happens day after day after day in a given year, all of a sudden the ratepayers are losing out. that power that just disappears into the air, that got paid for or offset by whoever produced it in small amounts, all of a sudden the ratepayer has to pay for that, and it's
Yep.
wasted.
We will be happy to address that, council member, because that's part of our system flexibility, where we can absorb the surge of power, and then we could use it or dispatch it to another location, so we don't have that loss in our system.
But when we do it in small amounts, it's easy to manage. When we're doing it in large amounts from tens of thousands of sources, I'd love to hear how you're going to manage that.
Okay, so before we close today, and you're going to come back, and we're working on a date for you to come back before the end of the year, and it may be the next week, as early as next week. And I'm going to read these questions into the record, because I want the record to reflect that these questions were asked.
Sure.
Even though you may have answered them in your report, but I want you to break them out for the next time around. Again, the question regarding estimations that the solar program could increase rates up to 8%, if not more, and then please give us some scenarios with details as to how they may increase. I want you to break down how much the ECAF can absorb, what the ECAF's impact, and whether or not the ECAF would require an adjustment. And you can do that in a simple chart form, scenario A, scenario B, scenario C. Tell us what the potential impact is to the existing transmission system. Can it handle additional capacity, or will it need to be expanded? Now, with respect to residential solar,
Can I clarify, Madam Chair, on the transmission question, as it relates to the solar?
yes, absolutely. Now, with respect to residential, average solar power roof system cost, break it down like this. And again, you can just do it in a simple chart. Installation cost, equipment cost, cost of ongoing maintenance, and you can pick a standard basin square footage home and break it down like that as an example.
Yeah, we'll be happy.
I want you to break out how low-income communities can be included in the residential solar plan, not only as participants, but as sources of potential employment, and what incentives the department can provide and will provide. I would also like for you to just do this in a chart form. We went over this once, the three major components of the 1280 megawatt solar plan, their objectives, and how each one works in tandem to improve the department's renewable portfolio standard. Just do that in a chart. Bullet point. I think you said it got up to 10%, but I want to lay that out so people are clear about that. If you also want to bring some clarity to the situation for the average layperson, your explanation about the numbers derived on megawatts in basin was pretty straightforward. I would just make a one-pager on that too. I'm also very concerned about the expanded residential program and the money we voted on for the infrastructure upgrades. And I want you to break it down for me as to how that infrastructure money, break it out, how much has already been expended, encumbered, and what remains to be spent, and to clearly demonstrate to me that there's no overlap there. The expanded residential program hopes to implement 130 megawatts of customer-owned solar power systems by, I think, 2020. Does that sound about right?
2016.
2016? All right. Give us a snapshot of how many megawatts you have in place now, and what's the likelihood of implementing 130 megawatts of customer-owned solar power over the next few years up to, I guess, 2016.
Yes, ma'am.
And then if you can do a comparative analysis in a chart form of what Edison and PG&E are doing, so we can see where we stand in the marketplace. Now, obviously, this plan is going to require a significant amount of investment from the department. in order to minimize the cost, obviously the department has to reach out to the industry. That includes the manufacturers and all those in the chain of manufacture and distribution. So you can give us a summation of what conversations the department has had with the solar industry, and to date what those are. Are they poised to work cooperatively, and are you intending to sign agreements that, you know, will be a matter of public record? And to what extent would they reduce the cost of solar products? And also, in conjunction with that, will the cost of, have you projected, will the cost of solar products be hampered by the increased demand of not only us, Edison, PG&E, and what's our reaction, or what are we doing about that proactively so that we don't get blindsided by a demand situation and then have to fight for whatever we get at a cost that's not competitive. And again, I'd like for you to break this down for the public so the public is very clear. You talked about the need to move on a comprehensive solar plan because of the pressure from state mandate. And that is factually true, but I want you to break down per SB 32, you know, why the time frame was chosen and what are your projected time frames. And again, state the specific mandates, the time frames under which the department is required to act, and how your proposal fulfills that mandate. And I think that's it. You can check in with, you want more?
Just to clarify, Councilmember Garcetti's request on the chart, so we'll include that as one of the action items to equalize the cost of coal versus the renewable.
Yes. Yes. And also, one other thing, I'm glad that we need a cost estimate of each solar program component. Okay? The customer solar power element, the DWP-owned solar projects in basin, and the large-scale solar projects outside of the basin. That cost should also include staffing and ongoing operational needs. And again, in a chart. And then, Mr. CLA, I know you and the clerk are trying to figure out a date.
Yeah, we'll get back to you in terms of a date. We'll work with the department to figure out what's doable within that time frame and get back to you, like give you some options.
Madam Chair, if I can suggest on this integration issue, the reliability, if you would like to set up a separate presentation for that, because that will go into details of
That's fine.
power system
Yeah.
reliability issues and stuff. So we
Fine. Yeah, you're right. That does require its own separate
okay.
agenda
So
item.
we'll set
We
something
can
up.
go, I would love to go into great detail on that.
Okay, we'll set that up.
All right, you can work with the CLA and the clerk too. So I don't want to overload the agenda. This can stand on its own.
Yeah.
Just answering all these questions will take up at least another hour.
Okay, we'll be happy to
Thank you very
present
much.
that.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Welcome, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
This is the end of the agenda. This is a period during which anyone wishing to come and make public comment on items that are not on the agenda can step forward. Otherwise, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.